Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Best Phone Plans Podcast. Today we are joined by special guest Sascha Segan. He is the lead mobile analyst at PC Mag, following closely the race to 5G of Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, how they are deploying 5G, what it means to you, the consumer. He's done many great articles, and you can actually subscribe to his new newsletter linked in the video description and in the podcast show notes. Sascha, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. We've talked on Twitter a bunch of times before, but it's really good to be able to talk to you as a human.
Yeah, it's great talking to anyone as a human, honestly. Just being stuck inside, I feel like the internet has become my portal into new worlds and to meeting new friendly faces. So we were just talking kind of before the show started. T-Mobile just wrapped up their analyst meeting. They were talking about their mid-band 5G spectrum holdings, kind of what their future plans are. Maybe we can kind of start with sort of the new mid-band 5G and what the landscape is looking like. Because I feel like the carriers are doing different approaches to mid-band 5G, and it means different things to their network. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Kind of where do we stand right now with mid-band 5G, and how are some of the deployments different between the carriers?
Well, the elephant in the room, and the reason the carriers are all having events this week, is this $80 billion spectrum auction that just ended for C-band, which is a giant amount of mid-band spectrum that cost a ton of money. And so everybody is talking about what they're going to do with C-band, whether it's in 2022 or 2024, which is when the two sections of C-band become available. Because right now, in terms of mid-band 5G, T-Mobile at this exact moment pretty much is the only game in town. Because of some bad decisions that the FCC made between about 2015 and 2018, our country didn't make dedicated mid-band spectrum available for 5G. Now, T-Mobile happened to have a lot of unused mid-band spectrum from Sprint and formerly Clearwire. And so they've been busy repurposing that for 5G. It turns out mid-band spectrum, so when we're talking about mid-band, that is generally understood as between about 2 and 7 gigahertz. And it's kind of the sweet spot in terms of the availability of, one, wide channels so that you can have these 5G speeds, because to get 5G speeds, you need wide channels. And two, coverage. Midband typically can go half a mile to a mile from a tower, and that makes it a lot more practical to cover an area than, say, millimeter wave, which has about an 800-foot range.
Sure.
So T-Mobile came into this year with really the only dedicated mid-band spectrum for 5G, and they call that ultra capacity, and they've been building that out all over the place. And they were talking a lot about that today. And Verizon and AT&T have been having to catch up. And Verizon and AT&T bought all of the C-band spectrum, which is becoming available next year. So they'll really start catching up on that next year. And in the meantime, they're doing all sorts of patchy things to try to fill things in and keep things going in the interim, like 4G CBRS, which we can talk about. And, we don't even know what AT&T is doing because they're going to tell us tomorrow.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, it sounds like, mid-band's here. T-Mobile kind of has the advantage right now because they have and own the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum that they can already deploy. And so what does that give them? Like maybe a year, 2 years head start kind of on the mid-band race?
Yeah, I would say it's between a year and 2 years. Verizon is saying that, the CTO of Verizon told me they were allowed to start building today, and they're going to start building today.
Okay.
So they're going to flip the switch sometime early next year, sometime before March 10th of 2022, and turn on 100 million people worth of C-band all at once. So it won't be a slow city-by-city thing. They're going to flip a big Frankenstein switch and light up a whole bunch of cities at once early next year.
Wow.
So that'll make it more competitive. But between now And March of 2022, or a little earlier if they push it at Verizon, T-Mobile's really got a huge advantage. And one of the questions here is really how much will they be able to consolidate that advantage to take subscribers from Verizon and AT&T to start new businesses like this home internet thing they want to do, while there's not much competition out there for them in terms of this citywide 5G.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point where I think Verizon's probably struggling the most, I want to say, with congestion, and they could really utilize, I believe, the C-band auction, that spectrum, to improve network speeds and performance for a huge number of their customers. In the meantime, T-Mobile is kind of in this position to really kind of get the edge of their deployments in. They actually talked a lot today about the rural markets and kind of expanding there. And maybe that's kind of an interesting point to make. Like, where do you see are the biggest opportunities for these carriers in terms of getting new subscribers? Is it stealing customers away from the other major networks, or is it trying to appeal to new customers in different markets that they haven't been able to reach before?
So yeah, I think T-Mobile has a lot of opportunities, and they were talking about that on the webcast today. T-Mobile has really, really low penetration in business accounts, and business and government accounts, actually, there's a lot of that, and you might not see it as a consumer. But there are all of these companies that buy, 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 lines for their employees. I have plenty of friends who have work phones, and all of those work lines are decided upon by an IT department deciding on one contract. So that's a big deal. And T-Mobile has very little of that business. So they're trying to push into those business and government accounts. But also, T-Mobile has really little penetration in a lot of more rural states.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is down to the fact that they didn't really have a network in those states until, a year or two ago. And they still have a legacy of most people think they don't have a network in those states. So they have a lot of opportunities to grow there.
Yeah, I think I saw you tweet out it sounded like your readers, your audience, their perception is that T-Mobile just doesn't have coverage in the rural markets. How do you think T-Mobile is going to try and change that perception?
I mean, T-Mobile needs to do a lot of marketing. And they need to do a lot of marketing on a small local basis with people in places that local people know and trust. They need to establish stores in these towns. They need to have the people in the stores in these towns marketing by word of mouth through the town. It's a big lift. It's a difficult task, but it's what they need to do to start turning these perceptions around.
Yeah. I think they mentioned they're bringing many more storefront locations to these rural markets. They're partnering. They're going to be in Best Buy locations, which Verizon,
Walmart.
AT&T. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, Walmart and Best Buy. And they're going to announce new hybrid stores with both Metro by T-Mobile service and T-Mobile service available in the same store, which is kind of interesting. So I think a lot going on with T-Mobile, pretty exciting. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what Verizon and AT&T are doing, because I think Verizon, they have their DSS 5G, and AT&T is, I believe, also doing DSS. What is the current customer 5G experience like on those networks, and how do you think they're going to kind of adapt going forward?
So AT&T is actually doing a wild mix of technologies. AT&T is doing a dedicated 5 megahertz channel of band 5 5G in a lot of places, and then they're supplementing that with DSS.
Okay.
But the result of all of that is a 5G experience which is indistinguishable from 4G. It's really 4G plus an icon. But AT&T users are used to their icons lying.
It's
so
standard. Yeah.
It's not a new experience for them. If they're still with AT&T after how many years of AT&T messing with your icons and lying about what network you're on, then I don't think what AT&T is doing with 5G is going to draw them off.
Yeah, you're right. You're totally right. And I think the biggest irony for me is that AT&T's fake 5G, their 5GE network, is oftentimes better and faster than their true standalone 5G network in its current deployment. And yeah, so do we know when we're going to be seeing the C-band being deployed by AT&T? Are we going to find out tomorrow, I think, or?
So we're going to find out tomorrow, but I am 100% sure that they're going to say the same thing as Verizon. They're going to say, we started building it yesterday. It'll be ready early 2022. Verizon and AT&T have pretty much 60-40 nationwide, launching in early 2022, where Verizon has 60 megahertz, AT&T has 40 megahertz. Now, that said, I still think Verizon is in a stronger position for a couple of reasons. One of them is CBRS. CBRS is a 4G technology, which is, right now it's a 4G technology, which is adjacent to C-band, but is already available.
Okay. What's the frequency of that?
CBRS is 3.55 to 3.7 gigahertz, and then C-band is 3.7 to 4.
So it really is right next to it.
It's right next to it. Now, you can't combine them because CBRS has like so many weird rules around it. It's like playing one of those German board games. And C-band is much clearer and simpler, and you can turn C-band radios up to much higher power than CBRS radios, and C-band is better. But Verizon has and has started rolling out this CBRS in a lot of in a bunch of denser cities. They have I think they have something like 30% population coverage available for CBRS in terms of what they've licensed. And so they're using it to supplement their 4G network. And of course, that's created a temporary situation where in those places now, the Verizon 4G network is absolutely screaming, and it's like double the speed of 5G DSS.
What are you getting on that? Have you tried it out?
The CBRS, yeah. So I've tried it in 2 locations here in Queens, and I got up to 815 megabits.
That is amazing, Sascha.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
And something you got to understand is that is perfectly possible for 4G. If you go north of the border to Canada, we've seen those 700, 800 megabit speeds on 4G in Canada plenty of times. What you just have to have is 5 carrier aggregation and a lot of spectrum. Once you've got 5 carriers and 90 megahertz of spectrum, you're getting those speeds. It's just that our wireless carriers down here never had that much spectrum to play with before CBRS.
So really quickly, outside of spectrum constraints, what else is holding the U.S. back as far as 5G deployment, Sascha?
A lot of it is really just what spectrum was picked when by the FCC. Because if we had, if there was an alternate reality where the FCC was smarter and they had auctioned C-band 3 years ago, we would be doing a lot better. And our cities, at least, would be looking a lot more like the city coverage in other countries. Now, there is one other big problem, now that I think about it, and it's real estate. Here in the US, in general, if carriers want to build out a new network, they have to negotiate with every city, every town, every one of the 563 independent New Jersey boroughs and the 169 towns in Connecticut, and the number of kind of tiny, petty, powerful local authorities that you have to negotiate if you want to put a panel up on a lamppost is gigantic in this country. And some other countries either have more streamlined processes or more simple layers of government, or honestly, they're just smaller. So South Korea, for instance, South Korea is considered a leader in 5G, but half the population of South Korea lives in the city of Seoul.
Okay.
So there's only one city to negotiate with.
Yeah. And I also know in South Korea, because I lived there for a month, their infrastructure is shared amongst their two main carriers. So they're not even making their own like individual networks. They're literally just sharing that same coverage with each other.
And that's another thing that you see in a couple of other countries. And once more, going back to Canada, one of the reasons Canadian 4G coverage and speeds in populated areas are typically better than ours, but also their prices are higher, is because 2 out of their 3 carriers share almost all of their infrastructure. And so they together have been able to build a really, really good network, but also they are not terribly interested in competing with each other on price.
So
Gotcha.
It's like they have an agreement, like, all right, we have our prices set. We're just going to kind of kick it into cruise control and kind of let that recurring revenue roll in.
Yeah, I mean, of course, they would deny that they have an agreement because that's probably illegal based on some sort of Canadian antitrust law. I don't know Canadian antitrust law, but I'm 100% sure they would deny they have an agreement, but it makes common sense to think they do.
Sure.
So Sascha, we talk a lot about the future and especially in the short term here with T-Mobile being well positioned. But my question for you is this: who do you think has the best long-term positioning? So after we get past like 2024, right, when all the carriers are talking about their projections, who's going to be the actual 5G leader? Who's best positioned for that once that rolls around?
I mean, I think in the long term, it is probably still Verizon by a nose, because Verizon has even more C-band coming online in 2024. And Verizon just in general has this incredible nationwide site network where, T-Mobile says that Verizon might have to build some more sites in cities for the C-band stuff, but Verizon has the square mileage covering the country that they can just add panels to. And they also have a history and a reputation for really solid network building. One thing I notice about our conversations so far that I think is really interesting, but it's also true about my mind, is why do we never think about AT&T?
I actually, fun fact, Sascha, I actually do have AT&T in my market of Pittsburgh. They're actually the king. I just didn't want to stop you in your tracks, but no, actually, AT&T outperforms everybody in my market.
Well, when we did our drive tests last year, and we do drive tests around the U.S. and Canada every year.
Sascha, real quick, what is a drive test? Can you just quickly explain that?
A drive test. So you get a bunch of phones with special SIM cards that never throttle. You put field test software on them that runs a speed test every 90 seconds. You put them in the front seat of a car, and you drive that car around a city, stopping in 12, 15, 20 locations, so that you end up having this big corpus of data with a lot of tests run on all the different carriers on the same type of device in the same place at the same time to eliminate those variables, all geographically throughout the city.
That is amazing.
It is. The project is a blast to run. I've been doing it since 2010. And so we've been able to chart how the networks have changed and grown over the years, which is also really great. But yeah, so when we did it last year, I mean, Verizon barely won, but it was basically Verizon won half the cities and AT&T won the other half.
That's interesting. But we're not really thinking about AT&T. We're thinking about, Verizon was, I feel like, the top carrier. They sort of, air quotes, won 4G LTE. I feel like they had the biggest footprint and were able to serve a huge number of customers. And I feel like what's happening now is T-Mobile is coming in as the underdog with this race to 5G, and they're trying to leapfrog ahead. But it sounds like AT&T, are they... what are they doing? Are they still worth talking about for 5G?
AT&T has a corporate identity problem. AT&T, of course, was this very powerful, meaningful wireless carrier throughout the whole iPhone era. They had the exclusive on the iPhone. Anyone who had an iPhone for 5 years had to have AT&T. And then they decided to become like a movie studio or something. And now they're obsessed with being a movie studio. And like they're still running the network and the network's good, but AT&T's like identity is very weird because all they really seem to care about is HBO.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Less emphasis on the wireless side, more emphasis, too much emphasis, debatably, on HBO. And I just know that AT&T has a huge amount of debt that will impact their business decisions and how they progress going forward. I think one of the big questions that I don't know if you'll be able to comment on this because we haven't really seen it yet, but how do you think the propagation characteristics of T-Mobile's 2.5 gigahertz will compare with the C-band that Verizon and AT&T have so aggressively accumulated from the recent auction?
So we're hearing brutally contradictory things on that right now. And it depends whether that is someone on Twitter who works for Verizon or someone on Twitter who works for AT&T. Who works for T-Mobile.
Yes.
So Verizon's CTO said to me this morning that because of C-band's greater allowable power than much of T-Mobile's 2.5, and because of the way Verizon has designed their overlapping cells in city and suburban areas, the radius is pretty much the same. And one of the points he makes is that you don't want to go all the way out. You don't want to have a cellular network designed so that you end up going all the way out to the edge of a cell and dropping off. You want your cells to overlap somewhat. And so according to Melody, the CTO of Verizon, you want to have, you're basically designing these for about the same distance, which is like 0.5, 0.6 miles.
Okay.
Now, if you listen to T-Mobile, they say their 2.5 has, 1.5 or twice the range that C-band does. And then if you go back to Verizon, they say, well, you're not taking device sensitivity and power levels into account. And then if you go back to T-Mobile, they say, well, we'll show you. So it's very much in debate.
I was just going to say, one thing worth mentioning is that 2.5 gigahertz for T-Mobile is a very dirty spectrum, right? Wi-Fi, right, uses it. So in cities like mine where Comcast has all the hotspots, they have to be mindful of that.
Wi-Fi does not use 2.5. Wi-Fi is in 2.4. It's adjacent.
Or excuse me. I'm sorry, my misspeech. I meant to say 2.4, excuse me. But Wi-Fi has the 2.4 gigahertz, which they have to be mindful of their guard bands to avoid interference, is what I was trying to get on. And then up in the northern border, up by Canada and down by Mexico, they have to be mindful as well, because up in Canada, they use band 7, I believe, which is a different flavor, basically, of the 2.5 gigahertz band 41 that's being deployed.
And then there's also, 2.5 is also divided into two halves, and they're called BRS and EBS. And the EBS half of 2.5 has really weird, tiny license areas and power requirements. And so it can be, and so if you're using the EBS spectrum, you may have to turn down your power to a level that may be lower than if you were using C-band spectrum in the same place. And that's kind of the point that the Verizon CTO was making. It's not just about the frequency. It's also about how wide is your license, how far up can you turn the radio, how good is the sensitivity on the phones, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think I was talking with Roger Etner recently, and he was saying the big question is not necessarily the outdoor penetration of these new frequencies, but the indoor penetration, because 80% of cell phone use is actually indoors. So it'll be really interesting, I think, to see as we're following this build out, how the networks perform in the indoor environments in the more congested markets.
I would say, oh, wait, people go into buildings that aren't their homes. I always forget that nowadays.
Yeah, right.
I was like,
people used to go to work, but
I was like, I'm at home. I can use Wi-Fi. If you're at home, why aren't you using Wi-Fi? And then it just struck me that people go into buildings that aren't their own houses.
Ultimately, I think all of the carriers are going to be forced to deploy microcell sites. Not only because that's what's going to be required for 5G in urban markets. But as we get talks into the future of 6G planning, one of the big talks about 6G and the specification that's being discussed is allowing different devices to essentially act like repeaters. That's like one of the concepts behind it for like these higher frequencies. So ultimately, the cell networks that we're used to with just macro cell sites being the answer, every like spacing every 2 miles with low band, isn't going to be the case. And I personally, in my personal opinion, don't think any network is truly like ready yet. Like I think everybody's still just taking the baby steps of getting the foundation laid.
Well, this is why one of the companies I really like to talk to occasionally are Pivotal Comware, and they're a company that is making millimeter wave repeaters for Verizon. And they have a product, and Verizon's working with 3 of these companies. Pivotal's just the one I know. And so they have these little boxes, and some of them go on street corners or lampposts to reflect and repeat and amplify a millimeter wave signal, and some of them go on your window to do the same thing and get the millimeter wave into the house. Wow. And that, Dennis, I mean, that's what you're talking about. And yeah, there's going to have to be a lot of that, especially going forward as we get into higher and higher frequencies. And of course, like once you start talking about 6G, that's a whole lot of like crazy sci-fi stuff right now. You know, that's like terahertz mesh networking in your furniture and like, you know, thought controlled networks, you know, whatever.
But ultimately, that's the foundation that's being laid. Like with I know 6G seems super far out, but as these carriers are spending billions of dollars, they're going to be thinking about that. And I was even referencing for 3.7, like for the CBRS spectrum, or for even T-Mobile, they're going to have repeaters in urban markets. Like Pittsburgh, for example, is very hilly. And I know that permitting can be nutty. You're not going to be able to fit macro sites where you need to. So in order to fill in those gaps, you got to have some repeaters along, say, light posts, for example. And that's going to have to be a discussion that T-Mobile looks into if they expect to match the level of coverage that AT&T has in my market.
Oh, yeah. So both Verizon and T-Mobile in these events were very careful to, like, they both wanted to minimize how many new cell sites they need to install. Because remember, these analyst days are primarily for financial analysts. Like when Verizon called on people to do the Q&A, it was all banks. You know, it wasn't any of the like nice, interesting analysts that we know, like Roger Entner or Avi Greengard. It was like all these guys we've never heard of from banks.
It's like, how much is this going to cost? Do we need to be concerned about your financials?
Exactly. And so they all want to minimize this idea of, well, for these new frequencies, you're going to have to put up more sites. But for these new frequencies, they're going to have to put up more sites.
Yeah, so we're kind of talking a lot about the future of 5G, which I'm personally very excited about. I wanted to bring it back to the present state of 5G. Sascha, you had a recent article talking about how you feel the new Magenta Max plan is the only real 5G plan. Can you talk a little bit more about why you think that is, and maybe if customers should actually keep 5G turned on or possibly turn it off?
Yeah, so the dream of 5G in, at least that I was sold over the past like 5 years, was that it has enough capacity for what you want to do. That is should be the absolute baseline for 5G, for a 5G experience. It's enough capacity for what you want to do. And that isn't true with low-band 5G. It isn't true with DSS. It isn't true with too many of the 5G experiences in this country right now. But if you look at the Magenta Max plan, it's the first unlimited plan that we've seen in ages that has no deprioritization. And that has no video throttle. And so it's actually trying to deliver this concept of, yeah, with 5G, we don't need to worry about capacity limits anymore. And that's what we've been promised. And all the other 5G plans on the market, to some extent, have those throttles and limits, with the one exception of when you're on a millimeter wave site on a Verizon plan. But that's only like, what, like 4% national coverage or something?
It's
Less
super
than that?
small. Yeah,
it's super small coverage. So Verizon's got this millimeter wave plan, which is real 5G, but you can't really use it most places. And for the nationwide 5G that they have, the DSS, it's got the deprioritization, it's got the video throttle, it's got a really limited amount of hotspot data. It's got all the frustrating things you're familiar with from your 4G plan. And Magenta Max is the first one that really lifts those barriers.
Yeah, how do you think having a unlimited, uncapped, full priority plan will impact the experience on the T-Mobile network? Will it suddenly cause it to be more congested as more users are consuming more and more data? Or does T-Mobile actually have the network in place to kind of handle that extra usage and extra capacity?
T-Mobile actually has a massive amount of unused spectrum right now. And what this really comes down to is how quickly they can get those old Sprint users off the Sprint network. The faster they can get those Sprint users over to the T-Mobile network, the more of that old Sprint 2.5 spectrum they can open up. And then they said, like, they were talking about it today, and they said, you know, we have the capacity in a lot of areas for people to be doing 500 gigs a month. And so at least that's what they're promising. They're promising that they've got the capacity. We'll see. You know, carriers have always seemed a little struck by surprise when they didn't have the capacity. But T-Mobile definitely has that headroom, and I think the only problem they could run into is if they can't free that Sprint spectrum up quickly enough.
Yeah, I think you're right. They said mid-2022 is when they'll have that switched over, which was interesting because I think they told Dish that they were shutting down the 2G network, or maybe it was the 3G network, at the beginning of 2022. So
yeah, but the 3G spectrum isn't what we're talking about here. So the 3G spectrum, Sprint's 3G spectrum, is all on 800 or PCS, and that'll still be used for 4G on T-Mobile. The 5G stuff is in band 41. It's all in 2.5, and they need to do various things to free that up. Like, I was talking to a guy on Twitter about how apparently here in New York they needed to make a deal with the Catholic Archdiocese of New York, which was holding a couple of bands of spectrum in between two other Sprint bands so that T-Mobile couldn't use them together.
Oh my gosh, that classic. That totally sounds like a United States spectrum problem.
I love the idea of like Mike Sievert having to go to the Pope and say, you know, your grace, grant me these airwaves, you know.
Yeah. No, that's amazing.
So Sascha, real quick though, if we get to the state where there's plenty of capacity to go around, will having that unlimited priority data be as important? Like, just thinking about it for a second, I know T-Mobile used to have an old OnePlus international plan, which that plan, in my personal opinion, is actually better. Even though it has a 50 gigabyte deprioritization cap, it had an unlimited hotspot add-on for LTE. And as long as the network's not congested, then the end user experience is still going to be good enough. So how important is it that you have that unlimited priority cap on your plan if the network's already good enough?
Well, I mean, that is, you know, that is the promise of 5G. Like, the promise of 5G is if the network works well enough, then you don't have to worry about deprioritization. Right now, we're not quite there yet in a lot of places. You know, right now, my neighborhood is probably good for that, actually, because I got 60 megahertz of standalone N41. You know, I'm
that's a dream.
I'm golden, but if you're somebody who, once again, like in the future, leaves your house and travels around the country, or lives in a place where, you know, they're still working that out, you are probably going to hit congestion and deprioritization at least for the next year or so.
Sure. And actually, speaking about deprioritization and network congestion, I read in one of your recent pieces that they're calling their C-band as part of their ultra-wideband 5G experience. They're bundling that together. And a result of that is that they're limiting the C-band spectrum access just to their premium unlimited plan subscribers, meaning that anyone who's on a prepaid plan or Verizon's cheapest Start Unlimited plan will have to pay extra to gain access to that newer, higher capacity, faster spectrum. How do you think, is that the right decision? How is that going to impact the experience on the Verizon network?
I mean, Verizon has never sold on price. You don't go to Verizon, or historically you have not gone to Verizon because you were the price-sensitive customer.
Right.
You go to Verizon to get a Cadillac experience at a Cadillac price. And they have not been able to deliver that Cadillac 5G experience to most people this year because of their lack of mid-band. So there has been this disconnect in terms of their value model. But they're promising, at least, once C-band comes online, they'll be able to do that again. And then the question there, of course, is T-Mobile going to be such a brutal competitor at that point that Verizon's whole 20-year brand building of, well, you pay more, but you get a more reliable network, that spell will have been broken by mid-next year. I mean, if that's true, then Verizon's in trouble.
Yeah, so T-Mobile could come in with that magic combination of network coverage, data speeds, and performance, and the lowest price in the industry so far as what we've seen. I guess my kind of question is, I would have thought as someone building a network, I would want to give this spectrum access to as many customers as possible to free up congestion and to make everyone's experience better. Does Verizon need to do that, or are they hoping that people who are experiencing the slower speeds will want to upgrade to get access to that faster spectrum?
So Verizon needs to pay for this?
That's a good answer. That's a great answer.
That's pretty much what it comes down to. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think they'll roll it back, though? Because I think they did that. They said when they first launched ultra-wideband 5G, it was going to be a $10 per month add-on for some of their plans. And now we see it's actually included with their top-tier plans. Would something similar happen, or do you think they have it set up right now, the top-tier plans get it, the entry-level and prepaid plans don't, and they're just going to continue with that pricing structure going forward?
I think they'll definitely push it to the prepaid plans.
Okay.
Yeah, I think prepaid has always been like a weird little tributary of Verizon. I think what's happening, so for the past 2 years or so, Verizon has really de-emphasized Verizon prepaid in favor of Visible. And so now that I'm thinking about it since you asked, what's going through my head is that it's going to come to Visible.
Yeah, they already did that with the millimeter wave 5G.
Yeah. And so they're going to be capturing what they see as that tech-focused, price-sensitive customer with Visible. Whereas they've never really seen Verizon. Like, Verizon prepaid has always been, to the people at Verizon, like a box they need to check. It's never been something they've been terribly enthusiastic about. So they'll leave that for probably for the very non-network sensitive customer, the person who, has, a safety phone or doesn't really use data, or, the 12% of people who will hold on to their flip phones until they die. And then Visible will take your college student who, is kind of the prepaid market, but is more tech-centric.
Sure. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm hoping Visible continues to improve their network tech and their network core. I believe their Denver node is down now, and I'm in Longmont, Colorado, so my ping times have actually gone sort of through the roof recently as everything's being routed through the New Jersey server.
Oof.
Yeah. It's a tough experience. And actually, kind of maybe on that, I'm curious, how do you personally test out the networks? I see the articles. I see you're taking pictures of your phone, doing the test. What's your process like? Because I jump in my car. I have to try and set up this camera to film what I'm doing, and it's just this cramped experience. But I'm curious, what are you doing to test these out?
So I have the huge advantage that I don't need to film.
Yep.
And that is a big pain, I know, for a lot of YouTubers and people who work in more video media. I just have to make charts in Excel. And so that makes it a lot easier that makes the process a lot easier for me. I have a whole bunch of different phones with a whole bunch of carrier-provided SIM cards. on a whole bunch of top-of-the-line unlimited plans. And my company also is a sister company to Ookla Speed Test.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah. So we and Ookla Speed Test have the same parent. And so I know the folks at Ookla Speed Test very well, and we actually have a special field test app designed by them.
Way.
Yeah, that gives me access to the full raw data produced by each of my speed tests. And Ookla Speed Test is collecting a lot more information than they necessarily represent to you on the consumer page. And so what this lets me do is for my phones, I get that full feed of everything that's been happening on the phone.
Can you give like an example of like some of the extra bits that you're getting?
I get primary channel that it's on. I get whether carrier aggregation is happening. I get, hopefully, sometimes, how many carriers are being aggregated. I get primary cell interface. I get like all the stuff that you generally get through Cell Mapper.
Okay.
Yeah.
But automated and tied to the speed tests.
Sascha, that is amazing.
Honestly, if Ookla wanted to make some money, like I already paid for the no ad version, but if they wanted to charge a subscription service for that, I guarantee you people like me and Stetson would happily pay.
Hey, I have been telling them for years to productize this field test software because they use it internally. And we've used it for our drive tests for years, but they've never really like productized it beyond that point. But I'm totally going to take this back to them and tell them again that they are missing an opportunity.
Please, I would hop on this so quickly. It would be so tremendously helpful. I think that is just so cool.
But really quick,
a lot of it, frankly, is the fact that we can automate it. And that you don't need to sit there and press a bunch of buttons waiting for things to happen and then take notes on a piece of paper.
Oh my God, that's Sascha, you just described exactly what I do. I'm sitting in my car. I'm cramped up with my iPad on my lap, entering in, like, as it gets the ping. All right, we got the ping. I'm typing that in. All right, we just got the jitter's in. A download, upload. All right, test is done. Next one. Like, hit record. Like, so the fact that you are able to automate that is incredible. And I love some of the data you're including in your articles where you're talking about the distance you are from the cell tower, the speeds and the performance, what the drop-off is like, and how the performance varies.
Yeah, now the ones with the distance, actually, those are done with the consumer app.
Okay.
Because since I'm not like running it for hours and hours and I'm trying to do specific locations, I actually just do stand there and I run a test on one, run a test on the next one, run a test on the next one. But also I just like maps. So
Yeah.
Really quickly, when you were talking about that, you were talking about all the different high-end phones you have and all the premium plans that you get to use because of testing. I was just curious, though, in your personal life, who's your daily driver carrier and what's your daily driver phone that you use?
So I've been a T-Mobile subscriber since about 2010. I was Verizon from 1999 until 2010 and then went over to T-Mobile. I'm very satisfied with T-Mobile performance here in New York City. And I used to travel a lot, and I was very satisfied with the great roaming stuff that T-Mobile did, and hopefully will do in the future. I switch phones every 3 to 6 months because I do still review phones. I've reviewed maybe 1,100, 1,200 phones by now. I've been doing this for 15 years. So
That's amazing.
Yeah. And right now I'm using a Galaxy S21 Ultra. Before that, it was a OnePlus 8 Pro. I'm hoping to take a look at the OnePlus 9 Pro when that happens.
Yeah.
I really like OnePlus phones. I really like how smooth the software is. But on the other hand, that S21 Ultra camera, if you were trying to take photos of cell sites, it's insane.
What are you using, the 30 times zoom or the like even a 10x zoom and just pop it in?
Yeah, I mean the 10x zoom, like the 30 times zoom, you really start to see the digital zoom. But yeah, exactly. Even the 10x zoom, it's a 10x optical. So like something that is like a block away on top of a 4-story building, it looks like you're right there.
Oh wow, that is so cool.
I'm not gonna lie, you kind of surprised me. I was really expecting to hear you say that either the Pixel was your daily driver or an iPhone, just because I would have envisioned you having your primary phone number on like an eSIM. This way, when you travel to places like Hong Kong, which I know is one of your favorite places, you could pop in an international SIM and just do that. Agreed. I do love T-Mobile's roaming, but it's capped at 256.
256, yeah, not great.
Depending on the plan.
All right, wait, 2 questions on this. Sascha, have you upgraded personally to the new Magenta Max, or are you still on a legacy like T-Mobile One?
Yeah, like last week we got 3 lines of Magenta Max here now.
Oh wow.
Nice.
I'm still on OnePlus, like the old $75 one, but I have the kickback discount, so it's like 65 because I'm using less than 2 gigs. So that's what I'm currently rocking. But Sascha, have you ever looked into any like prepaid or MVNO carriers, like Mint Mobile, for example? Like, have you ever considered just being like, you know what, I don't really need this Magenta Max plan. Maybe I'll be better off with.
I mean, I'm fortunate that like I can afford a mainline postpaid plan. It doesn't really like it's not a huge financial drain on me. But that said, I really like US Mobile.
Oh yeah.
Ooh.
Do you see their new plans that just announced on Monday? Unlimited everything. Oh.
They are, I mean, they're just a great operation on every level. And I know you had Ahmed on here the other week. He is, like, for years, I had been looking for, and my readers had been looking for, a wireless carrier that was run by actual wireless geeks. And years ago, that was a dream around, there was this carrier that existed for a little while called Helio.
Okay.
And that was supposed to be the wireless geek carrier, and then various awful things happened, and it was terribly disappointing. And then to some extent, it was kind of T-Mobile through a lot of the early Un-carrier years. But Ahmed is such a wireless geek. He's such it's really a carrier run by the guys who love phones.
Yeah,
and you can see that.
I think he's described it to me as it's a tech company of nerds, like who are passionate about tech and enthusiastic about it, and they just so happen to be operating in the MVNO space. Like they would be doing something tech related in any space. And yeah, I think it's a delight to see that. I think many of the prepaid options are so focused on being as affordable as possible. You see corners cut on the app experience, if there even is an app, on the mobile website and account experience.
Mint has had serious billing problems. Like Mint has Mint has a lot of great plans out there, but I have heard a lot of complaints about double billing, billing reliability, generally the process. I would throw out there another one, pour one out for Republic Wireless too.
Oh yeah, they were just acquired. Dish.
Yeah, which I see as killed.
Oh, okay. Actually, this is a good segue. Sascha, what is your take on Dish right now? I feel like they've been kind of radio silence. They've been buying subscribers, losing subscribers, then buying more subscribers. What's your take on Dish? Do you feel like they're going to stand a chance in the industry?
I mean, I've always felt that Charlie Ergen is a giant snake.
Okay.
Like, I get no sense whatsoever that he's out there to help consumers in any way. So I don't think he particularly wants to build a network.
Okay. Not really something I wanted to hear, but all right.
Yeah. Sorry, Dennis, you go.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I agree with Sascha completely. I mean, think about it, Stetson. He's been having a nest egg on Spectrum that's been going unused for literally almost like a decade at this point.
2011.
Oh.
Yeah. And honestly, his track record for using anything meaningful that he's acquired has been very poor. Sure, Dish has a decent track record in the cable space, but it's not like that industry had the best reputation to begin with anyway. I mean, basically, if you're not actively messing over your customers, you're doing okay. So I don't necessarily have the highest hopes, which I said in the past, although the talks with them partnering with Amazon makes me feel more hopeful, because I do know that Amazon both has the coffers and the competence to actually deploy a meaningful network.
Yeah, I think the key about Dish's strategy is that they are either going to find someone else to spend the capex, or it's not going to get built at all. And that could be them talking Amazon into capex. That could mean them leasing their spectrum out to the cable companies when the cable companies decide to do capex, and then being an MVNO on that. That could mean re-entering I don't know what the deal is about agreements they can and can't do with T-Mobile, but they could just lease all the spectrum they own right back to T-Mobile, and then just be a T-Mobile MVNO forever. But
That'd be terrible.
they are gonna do everything they can not to build a network.
So, quick question: you brought up the cable companies, right? Do you think they're going to be meaningful competition? Like, do you think they might become like a meaningful regional player? Let me put it that way, similar to how like U.S. Cellular is. Like, for example, Xfinity with their Xfinity Mobile, right? They've got a pretty densely packed network with their little Wi-Fi hotspots that they could probably easily convert into small cells if they needed to, if they were to, like, say, lease that spectrum off a dish in your example. And they already have a business that sort of synergizes the same way AT&T kind of synergizes everything. Do you think they might be like a big up-and-coming fourth player in a sense?
Yeah, I think there's still a possibility. So the only two that would be players would be Comcast or Charter. I don't know if you saw that CNBC interview with the CEO of Altice, which is a mid-sized cable company. They used to be called Cablevision.
Okay.
But he basically disparaged his whole industry and all came very close to saying he wanted to sell his company to T-Mobile. Yeah.
Jeez.
So Comcast and Charter are your two players there. And yeah, I think they could potentially. I think they're biding their time. They've done well with this Verizon partnership. And they would need to be convinced, like, once again, like, CapEx is a pain in the butt. Building a network is expensive and annoying. So all these new entrants start from a position of, what can we do to not build a network?
Well, that's why I think of cable companies first, because, well, specifically Comcast, like, they already have all the permitting done for most areas. Like, they already have access to all the poles, which means that just saved them a ton of time there. And then they've already have fiber ran on all these poles, so that's already done. And then they already have all the power supplies and backup power generators, which is something that T-Mobile typically cuts corners on, already basically done in this regional sense. So it'd be very easy for them to be like, you know what? Instead of us running on like this little Wi-Fi hotspot that people probably aren't necessarily using if they're at home anyway, we'll just swap this out real quick for a quick little small cell for millimeter wave or whatever band or frequency they want to utilize, and it becomes multi-purpose. They can sell their cell phone service, or they can get cell phone usage off of the Verizon MVNO agreement, so they're not paying them per gigabyte or whatever that deal was they worked out. And then two, it lets them open up other products, right? Maybe it's the last mile delivery for their internet. Instead of using coax, they're just popping in a 5G little repeater inside of a rural American's house, which is much cheaper than them digging up the ground to lay 300 feet of cable.
I think that's totally the right direction. When I last spoke to Comcast, they said that they kind of described a situation where they partner with Verizon on the radios, and then they drive that down into their own core. And that's a form of MVNO that I believe exists in other countries, but does not exist here. I forget what the word is, but it's a specific kind of MVNO.
Is it a co-op? Or...
I don't know. I'm
sorry. My apologies.
But in any case, it's a situation where Comcast owns the whole system up to the radio, and then they're renting the radios, basically.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so they own the core.
Yeah, so that's different, I feel like, than what everyone else is doing. They're just kind of leasing access to the network as it's built. And it sounds like what Comcast would be doing is architecting and designing their own network structure for their own optimizations and own features.
Right, but not having to pay for node Bs. And you end up with a situation which I think ends up looking a lot more like wireless carriers that have shared infrastructure, like we were talking about with Korea and Canada, where Comcast and Verizon start to be two somewhat separate carriers with some shared infrastructure, as opposed to Comcast just, stamping a label on Verizon service. Sure. And then, Dennis, what you said about using wireless to extend their ISP market, I think that's absolutely something they're looking at. And man, do we need more home ISP competition in this country. I'm so glad. I'm so glad to hear about what Verizon's doing. I'm so glad to hear about what T-Mobile's doing. I'm so waiting for people to shut up about Starlink.
Oh, you're not on the Starlink bandwagon?
Okay, so here's my perspective about Starlink, and I've done a bunch of stories about Starlink, and I've done studies on Starlink and all of that. Starlink is absolutely great in terms of liberating those poor souls who have been shackled to the fetid horror that are HughesNet and Viasat for years. Starlink is going, like, in those rural areas with the family that lives on top of a mountain with nobody else within 20 miles, who have not been able to get their kid into school because their HughesNet system goes to 256K at 4 o'clock every afternoon. Starlink is going to change their world. But the problem I find with Starlink is because it is associated with, 420 blaze it stonk savior Elon Musk, 200 million people think it's going to rescue them from Comcast. And that's just not the case.
I agree with that sentiment 1,000%. My question, though, is to you is this. If you had to pick between either T-Mobile's home-based internet or Starlink, and you're like one of those poor rural souls that the only option was dial-up or DSL for you, or the dreaded HughesNet, which would you pick?
If you have T-Mobile available, I would definitely say T-Mobile, because it is much easier for T-Mobile to scale that capacity if they need to than for a satellite-based system to scale and increase capacity.
I should probably add a caveat. Remember, you're in rural America. Like, in rural America, T-Mobile does not do great. They probably have like one cell site that's barely covering, probably no backup power on it either, because like I said, they typically cut that corner. And as far as deployment's concerned, you're probably only going to see like band 12, band 71, and maybe some PCS band 2. And 41's probably not going to be on that cell site.
Then they might not be offering the home internet product.
Oh, you don't think they would offer it still?
I think I think they're going to offer it where they have capacity for it.
Yeah, I think that was the takeaway I got from the investor presentation today is T-Mobile's kind of strategically offering their services in the markets they have the available capacity and can provide a better experience for customers.
Also, remember that T-Mobile's going to charge $60 for this, and Starlink's going to charge $100.
Yeah, that's another good point. And the upfront equipment cost as well as Starlink, I think it's like $500 for the massive antenna you got to mount somewhere.
And apparently they're losing money on those.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's really expensive.
Yeah, but like, so once again, like, it's a last resort. Like, it's a great last resort that is going to, like, I don't want to minimize how much it's going to help people stuck in those last resort situations, but anything ground-based is going to be less expensive and more flexible.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, Sascha, we have 2 more questions from our Patreon supporters that I'd love if we could get your answer to. Mark asks a question about the future. What can a consumer expect to do with 5G technology in 2025?
2025. Oh, hey, 2025 is when those Apple glasses are coming out, right?
Maybe it'll be the Apple glasses. Maybe it'll be like the $3,000 VR part 1 of the Apple glasses. But yeah, maybe those will be available.
Yeah, I think that is our current 2025 target is for consumers those low latency AR experiences, because the networks will have been flipped over to standalone by then. We'll have a lot more edge compute, so we'll have those sub 10 millisecond latencies in a lot of places. And then hopefully we'll start to have more of the hardware for these AR experiences. And then you'll have more broad-based AR and VR. and that'll be a big consumer use there.
Yeah, I think that'll be huge. And possibly even if we don't have the glasses, our phones will get new AR implementations and new ways we can use them as well. Okay, the second question comes from Hector Hernandez. Hector's asking, companies like Ferrari, they don't advertise as much because their product speaks for themselves. Notably, AT&T hasn't advertised as much or at all compared to Verizon and T-Mobile. Is this because they would rather use their ad money towards their 5G or because their 5G coverage will soon speak for itself?
It is because AT&T is convinced they are an entertainment company. And they are spending all of their marketing budget on HBO Max.
That explains so much. I wish it was the other way around. I know Verizon has committed, I think, an extra $10 billion per year to building out their C-band spectrum.
It's $10 billion over the next 3 years. They're committing just to C-band.
But AT&T is they're gonna build.
Yeah,
we're talking about marketing here.
So we just haven't seen it yet from a consumer standpoint. And maybe that's good, because I know T-Mobile and Verizon got a lot of flack for their support teams advertising to turn off 5G, and the marketing budget is going all in on 5G. So it's almost like some mixed messaging.
We never talked about that turn off 5G thing. And I think we got to touch on it. Yeah, so that was it's been such a massive own goal on Verizon's part. And it comes down to DSS was... From what I've heard, DSS was a technology that nobody particularly wanted, except that carriers that didn't have any mid-band spectrum desperately needed to force a 5 icon onto screens without actively lying about whether or not they had 5G NR running. And so DSS was this stopgap in terms of, well, how can you create a 5G network with no actual 5G channels? And its performance is not great.
Yeah, it's actually worse in many cases.
We have...
But there was latency improvements and such that came from it, right? Like, there were still certain benefits that came from having DSS enabled, specifically with latency, right?
I don't think so. But...
Well, just because it's utilizing the more efficient, some of the more efficiencies that come from 5G itself, whether it be the propagation, there's certain...
It's still NSA, which means that you have the basic latency of the 4G network.
Interesting.
You don't get the real latency advantages until you go to standalone.
Gotcha.
And also DSS, it turns out, creates interference.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah, there was a paper that I've been tweeting out a lot that shows it. It's not great. So, but it's what Verizon's got until next March. So, I ran a story saying, if you have the option to turn off 5G, it might be better on a Verizon phone. 4G may actually be a better experience for you. And then somebody at Verizon tech support was caught saying the same thing.
Yeah, I think between the speed improvements on LTE and the battery improvements typically, LTE just seems like the correct thing. So it sounds like you would say if you have the option for it to turn off 5G until maybe next March, where we get the C-band.
I think if you're on Verizon or AT&T, if you're on Verizon or AT&T and you are not in a millimeter wave area, because millimeter wave is awesome. If you can get millimeter wave, that's a whole different world. But if you're not in a millimeter wave area, on Verizon and AT&T, we have not seen 5G offering a notable improvement over 4G, and it definitely does use more battery in the complex encoding that's going on, so I don't really see the advantage.
Yeah, at T-Mobile, though, you might keep it on?
Oh, definitely.
What's different about their deployment? Why would you keep that on? Is it because they're doing standalone? Or
No, it's because they got all that mid-band.
I
don't want to lose my N41.
I gotcha. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, okay, the one final question I had for you, I was just curious, what do you use when traveling internationally? I know your T-Mobile plan includes the international data at 2G speeds, but I also know, you're going to Mobile World Congress. I feel like someone like you would be enthusiastic to try maybe an eSIM plan or to sign up for a local carrier. What's your go-to international solution?
So for many years, I would go and sign up for local carriers in various places, in part as kind of a tourist experience. Um, at Mobile World Congress every year, I made it like part of my first day to go to the Vodafone store and to get it's a Vodafone U plan, YU,
Okay.
which was just for many years this really good Vodafone prepaid plan. And then I'd pop it into a secondary phone. When I went to Asia back right before the pandemic, I used the US Mobile eSIM plan.
Oh, no way.
Yes, and that has full speed roaming.
Stop. No
Yeah,
way.
it is wicked. So once again, US Mobile for the win here.
Oh my gosh.
And I have one quick question of my own. Since you've been so seasoned as a traveler and you specifically focus on the U.S. and Canada markets, I just wanted to ask you, who do you think is doing cell phone networks better? Do you think the U.S. is doing it right as far as like our plans, pricing, and network performance? Or do you think Canada's approach with like the sharing of the infrastructure and stuff is the better way that America can learn from and we should start following?
I think over on the balance, what's funny is that Canada has slightly higher technical quality networks. Okay. But on the balance, I think the US is doing better because we have more actual competition and especially the really vibrant MVNO sector. We have so many I mean, I hate saying we have so many options here because T-Mobile and Sprint never should have merged and we should have 4 carriers. So, like, I don't, so we have fewer options than we used to have, but at least we still also have the MVNOs. And the Canadian carriers move a lot more slowly when it comes to especially plan innovation. And when it comes to things like data caps, which are the thing that every wireless user most hates in the world. And T-Mobile, like, the U.S. market is nimbler and more flexible and has more like interesting ideas going on plan-wise. And I think that has, definitely helped consumers here.
Sure. Awesome.
Gotcha. Well,
Yeah,
I was just going to
Sasha.
say, sorry. I just want to say, Sasha, thank you so much for coming on. We will definitely have discussions in the future, especially after you get a chance to review some of these new phones that you're getting in hand, like the new OnePlus 9 and the Asus ROG phone, because I would love to talk to you about that. And I just want to thank you again for making the time to come on to the show. Do you have anything that you want to plug before we call it?
Yeah, absolutely. My big project right now is my newsletter. It goes out on Fridays. It's called Race to 5G. You can push a link to it, or if you just type in your Google PC Mag newsletter sign up, you'll get our newsletter sign up page, and you'll be able to sign up for my Race to 5G newsletter. It's usually like a bit of a lead story. It's a little spicier than what I write on the site the rest of the week, and then a couple of interesting things I've been reading around the web, like, for instance, that interview where the Altice CEO disparaged his entire own industry.
Yeah, I'm actually a reader of the Race to 5G newsletter. I've been loving it, and anyone who's interested can find it, again, linked in the video description in the show notes, and also just put it in the live chat so you can check it out there. Sascha, we really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. We'd love to have you on again in the future. I know you've got to write some articles about the T-Mobile press event, so thank you so much for joining us. We'll look forward to talking to you again in the future at some point.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'll see you on Twitter, and then we'll get back together again sometime.
That sounds great. All right, take care.